Hello all, welcome back to the channel. Yes, it's been a while since I've uploaded a video, and today we have come up with a new video. So this video we are going to build a REST API, not any ordinary REST API, but we are going to build a production grade, production ready, production level API, a REST API using Spring Boot. Right. So if you're someone who is has a slight idea of Spring Boot, or if you're interested to understand what Spring is or Spring Boot is, and this is a perfect video to start with, right? And often we don't hear about Spring Boot while we're in college, or while we are trying to build a projects or not. But when you enter a corporate world, right, Spring is a very big thing, right? Spring is something which which makes or breaks the production, and I have seen multiple billion-dollar projects being built using Spring, right? So there are multiple advantages of Spring, and this is not the video to understand why Spring is best and all. So there are multiple videos that you can check out. This video is solely idea of this video is we are going to build a REST API. So we're going to build a sample REST API, and we'll see how Spring makes it easy, or Spring makes it quick or efficient enough such that the Spring is being used in many production level projects, right? So this is the idea of this video, and let's start by building the project. Let's not waste any time. So for building the Spring, I'm going to use Spring Initializer. So this is where I get my initial template of the project. You can simply open your IDE and you can create a project from there. But by using Spring Initializer, you can add dependencies easily, right? So we can also do it from directly from pom.xml in our project. But we have to take one more step and go and find this artifact IDs and all. But Spring Initializer is a good way to start, right? So I'm going to use Maven as my project builder, and Maven project, and Java, and I'm going to keep 2.4.5 as a Spring Boot version. And here where you have to give your project. So I'm going to call it as aka such. Yes, and I'm going to call it as an CRUD API. So we're going to create an API which is capable of performing all the CRUD operations, right? And we're going to name it as a CRUD API. And so yeah, REST API project, right? And Java. So I have a Java 16 SDK, so I will be using Java 16. You can go with any version as possible, as long as you have that SDK with you. And here is where the interesting part comes in. So here you can add dependencies, right? So what I mean by adding dependencies, if you add a dependencies, this template will fetch those artifacts and dependencies and add it into our XML file. So later when our Maven is trying to build the project, it will go and find those IDs and will fetch the projects into a local repository, right? So for this we need so the project we are going to build is a REST API, right? So when I say REST API, there are three things, right? So we have a end user, and we have a database, right? And the API stands in between and will take the request, process it on our database, gives back the request. So we need a database, right? For this video, I'm going to use H2 database. H2 database is similar to, let's say, if you have used Android, right? So Android has something called a SQLite database, which is an inbuilt database. You don't need to install any drivers and all. So this is an inbuilt database, which has small footprint, but it can handle some terabytes of data. Right? We're going to use H2 database. We're going to use the Spring JPA, that is useful for all the DB operations, and so it's lot important, and it is the best, right? And we're going to use again Swim Web for all the MVC purposes. So let's add that. So I'm going to use the Spring Web for building RESTful MVCs, etc. So we have a Tomcat server built in for us. So we can simply build the project, and that server, everything will be run for us. We don't need to go and install Tomcat or servers and all. Everything will be streamlined for us by using Spring Web. And as I've said, we're also going to use H2 database. Yeah, so it is a SQL database, and it is an in-memory database. So one thing to understand is that H2 is an in-memory database. You are not going to use any external database, but it is very simple to add external databases as well. So once I have, let's say, now a project is being run using H2 database, right? And it's just a matter of modifying one property file so that it can be later used to databases like PostgreSQL or even MongoDB or any kind of databases. Spring is very flexible and it works with almost any kind of database. You can able to think it, so you can perform it, right? So this is the database, and one thing is we need JPA. So yeah, so this is how we interact with the database, right? So if I have to know explain it in very common terms, this is like an entire library of SQL and how the data is being the how database being managed and how we perform the operations will be provided by Spring Data JPA. So these are the key dependencies that we need, and you can say jar as a packaging manager, and yeah, that's it. And I can simply generate this project, and this will generate a bare bones file for us. So let's go to documents, and let's say, yeah, CRUD API. So yeah, we have that, and let me just unzip it, and we'll open that in our favorite ID. Let's say extract all. Yep, it's been extracted, right? So the ID that I'm going to use here is called as Intellij Ide, right? So I have ultimate license, so I'm using that. So you can use any ID like Eclipse ID or Eclipse Spring TCS or STS. There is an ID which is sole purpose. It is designed for Spring itself. So there are multiple IDs which you can use for the same purpose. But I suggest Intellij ID, and there is a community edition which you can download for free, and there is also licensed version Ultimate Edition. If you can pay for the license, you can go for it, or there are other ways like student licenses, anything like that. Even if you couldn't find a license for you, you can simply go with an free trial of 30 days, right? So that 30 days will be more than enough to understand how things work. Let's go to our documents, and so yeah, this is our project. So this is a project. I'm going to open this project. Trust it. Yeah. So mine is a pretty weak system, so it might take a couple of seconds to load the entire dependencies, right? So I'm going to skip the video till that point, and we'll meet you once we have. Okay, the project has been set up, and this is a project. So you can see there is two file folders, right? So this is a project folder, and there is something called as external libraries. So external libraries is where the libraries that we have added, the dependencies that we have added, are being loaded from the internet, right? So we have our 16 JDK, Java JDK, and these are all the dependencies that Maven has bought us from the internet. So it has bought us Spring Boot starter, it has bought us the Spring Boot JPA, everything it is being bought by the Maven itself, right? So these are all the external libraries. These are being loaded into our system. And once you look at the project, so there are one main file that you have to always take care of. So this will have all the information of a project. So like what's a group ID, artifact ID, version, and so what's the Java version, what are the dependencies that we are using. You can see that we have added a H2 dependency, and we have added a Spring Boot dependency, that is starter for web, etc. So this is how the dependencies are being brought into our project, right? You can manually add as many repositories as you can based on your need of the project, right? And then next thing that we need is yeah, this thing. So this is our package. So our code goes into this package. So nothing new to say, right? So let's open our first file. So this is the first template that we are given, right? So let's understand what is this like. So it is importing Spring Boot application, and you can see we have denoted at Spring Boot application. So this means that Maven knows that this is the Spring Boot application. So we are saying that this is a Spring Boot application. So if without that, it would be a pure old JavaScript, pure Java, right? So, but once we have added this at Spring Boot application, we are denoting that this is our starting point of our application. And when I run this, so project starts, right? And we can create anything here. So let's try and begin our REST API slowly, right? So the REST API that I was thinking for this project is a jokes API. Sorry, let's do a codes API. So let's say we are creating a database of all the inspirational quotes from all the different authors, like Mahatma Gandhi, Mandela, anybody. These days, even people on Instagram are promoting their quotes, right? So let's do that. Let's create a database of all these quotes and their authors, and we're going to provide an API. So API will give us all the quotes, and when we can perform all the CRUD operations, like we can create codes into the database, we can update the codes, we can retrieve the codes, we can delete them, and all this good stuff, right? So let's do that. So uh, in boot, when we are trying to build a REST API, so there are few things to keep in mind. So one is controller. So controller is place where all the requests are being mapped and all, right? And we also need a model. So model or a table, so is like what is the table that you're creating, right? So for the jokes, we are going to create some kind of class, right? So for which represents particular code. Sorry if misplace jokes and quotes, understand that I'm saying quote. And there's also something called as repository is like how we are accessing our database. And there's also something called as service, right? So these are all different layers, so we separate our business logic from one thing to another. So we try to loosely couple our data, our code, everything like that. So this is the beauty of Spring. And when you simply some people talk about Spring, they only say that yeah, Spring is used for dependency injection, right? So that was true like 20 years back. Sorry, not 20 years back, maybe 10 years back, right? But now Spring can do much more than only dependency injection, right? So let's try and build that. So I'm going to create a package here. I like to do this because I like to keep everything into packages. So let's call it as codes package. Codes package. Let's keep it simple. So this package will keep everything, that is every all the code related to our package. So as I've said, there are multiple things to build. So let's build them, and let's talk about them. So first of all, I need a model, right? So I'm going to call it as code, and it's going to be a Java class. And also I need a controller, right? Java class code controller, right? And I also need a repository, right? So code repository, and I also need a service, right? So code service, let's keep it as an interface here. And let's also implement our service here. So new class code service implementation, right? So let's say these are things that we need, so we'll add anything if we need as we go on. So code is a place where we create our code object. So what are the things that we need in our code, right? So let's say so if I have a code, then I need it to be it has id, right? So makes sense, private long id, right? So each code has a unique id for that. And also for each code has what is the code exactly. So string code, right? Simple. So what is the code is actually, I think long, sorry, I generally forget these things. Okay, we have a string of code, and also we can say string of who is the author of that code. Wait, string author. I think we should use naming convention properly. ID quote author, and we also need let's say when it is being published, right? Published on, or something like that. Oh, string, sorry. Okay, so this is going to be a string public, sorry, it is going to be a date, right? Date. Let's do alt into that. So yep, so these are our fields that our code will have. So when somebody asks for our code, so these are the code that we are going to store in the database. So this is going to be our table, right? So let's also say that it is going to be a table, right? Table. So this is going to be my table, right? And I also have to add it as entity. So by adding it as entity, JPA will recognize that this is our table. So you can see that the symbol has been changed, right? So apart from that, we need to add getters and setters, right? Generate and getters and setters. Select all. Yep. So we got getters and setters for everything, and we also need a toString also, right? toString. Yep. Yep. And we also need a constructor. So public. Let's do generate itself. So why take? So constructor. Select all. True. Right. So this is how we can generate a thing, right? But we haven't finished it yet. So we have this, right? So but how are we going to generate our IDs, right? So ID is not going to be generated by ourselves, right? So ID is going to be generated by it is going to be auto generated. So auto generated. I think there is something called as generated. So yeah. So it is going to be a generated value, and I think we have to pass a method. Element type dot method. Okay, wait. So rest everything are going to be a columns. So let's say this is going to be a column, and this is also going to be a column, and even this is also going to be a column, but it is going to be auto filled, right? So we are not going to no push the date each and every time, but we are going to say when it is going to create it, right? So that is where the date has to be created. So created timestamp, right? So yeah. So this is how there are multiple annotations that they provide for us. So we can use them to do that. So we can also provide names for columns, I think. Yeah, name is equal to, and I'll call it as a quote, and name. I'm going to call it as an author. So when we are performing a request from our client side, this can be used for the bodies. Convert to string later. Yeah. Yeah. So this is how you can no create a model for us. So this model will be recognized as a table by our JPA, right? And so we have our ID, right? So we have to specify that this is going to be our ID in our table. So I think, yeah. So ID. So this is what we did here. So I have created a table. You can call it as a table, right? So a table called as a quote. So we are going to use annotation called as entity, right? So this will take care of that. And so we have an ID, that is ID. So we're specifying that this is our primary key, and this ID is going to be generated automatically by our JP, right? So this is going to be automatically generated. So as soon as we get new entries, each will get an ID. And so quote is a column, and author is a column, and published on is a column. I'm saying that published on will be automatically populated by the creation timestamp. So whenever the request has been made, so it will take the timestamp of that time and will add it to the model. So and we have simply made our uh, what do you say, our getters and setters and our override methods like toString and our constructor. So this is how we can uh, do do our model. And once we have a model, so it is a good place to go to controller and understand what a controller is, right? So a controller is a place where all the requests that are being passed are being controlled, hence we call it as a controller. So in order to know to make it possible, so we're going to say this as a REST controller. So we're going to annotate it as a REST controller. So now Spring knows that this is a REST controller, and this is where the mapping happens, right? And I'm going to map this to a path in my API. So let's say mapping. Let's give it a mapping, right? Let's it is called as request mapping. So yeah, request mapping, and we can pass some kind of string here. So I'll say API. So whenever somebody goes to slash API, like, so this is where the code, or this is where the controller takes him to, right? So now let's simply create a hello message for now. Then we can move ahead and create all our repositories and all. So let's say public, sorry, public string, and let's call it as hello. Let's say simply hello, and instead of string, let's pass it as a list of strings. This is going to be a list of string, and it is going to simply return a list. Let's say list list dot off. Okay, list dot off of let's say simply hello and what, right? So this is going to be a simple small API path. So let's try and deploy this. Sorry, I mean try and run this, and let's see what's happening and how the browser or Postman client reacts to that. And you'll also see some kind of errors and some settings that you have to perform. So let's try and wait while this is being, the project has been built. Some kind of depreciating errors, so that's not an issue for now. The build should start. Yeah, the build has been started, as you can see, right? So it is no, it has initializing a Tomcat server. Everything is being done there, and you can see that the Tomcat has been started on port 8080, right? Now if I go to a Postman client, yep, if I go to a Postman client, and let's say if I say API slash, let's go for, don't say, let's say localhost API slash hello. If I send that, I'm going to get not found. Why is that? Yeah, because we haven't specified the path, right? So when we are trying to perform a get request, we have to also do get mapping, get mapping, and I'm going to call it as slash hello, right? And apart that, since we're trying to use the JPA, right, so we have to also perform some settings here. So when we go to application properties, initially now the properties are nothing, right? But I'm going to show you one thing, right? So let me open this file here. So these are few settings that you have to go. Since we're trying to use JPA, and we are going to use H2 as our database, we have to add these. So let me explain what. So this is these both are self-explanatory. So we are enabling H2 console, and we are also setting its path to slash H2. And this sixth line, it says that show SQL, right? So previously when we ran, right, so we saw some console output, right? So if I enable this as a true, this will show me what's happening in the backend. So what are the SQL commands that are being performed? Because I have created a model and I have named it as entity, right? So but in the backend, the GPA will create a table. So for that, they're going to use some SQL commands. These are going to be shown in the command prompt. And this is the important thing. So DDL auto. So there are multiple. So in fact, let me show this. So this is, sorry, I think that was another. So in Stack Overflow, there is a beautiful article that was written by some person. So regarding that, so these are so basically we use this, to say to our thing, right? So what happens when I restart the server, right? So currently we are trying to testing the project. So we haven't built the project, we're trying testing the project. So what happens when I make a changes and try to restart the project? So if I say create and drop, so it's going to drop everything, right? So drop all the previous tables and all, and create a new schema for us. So that is why we use create drop. Now let's save this, and now if I build this, you can see the console output is going to be a little different. You can see the actual SQL commands that are happening in the back, like create our code, right? So let's see that, right? So Spring Boot has started, right? So yeah, as you can see, right? So as I've said, we can see the commands so which are being performed by Hibernate. So you can see that drop table if exits, right? So it is dropping all the tables that are being present previously, dropping all sequences. Now it is going to create a new sequence, and it is going to create a table for us. So it is being a table quote with ID and with the varchar with date, and it's also using primary keys or ID. So this is how the table are being created in the backend, and it is started a server on Tomcat. So we can go to our this thing and say localhost 8080, or even let's simply go to our this thing postman, and if I make a request, now we can see that the output is hello world, right? So which we have passed in our controller, right? So I think you have an idea about controller is and how Spring Boot handles this mappings and all. So this is a good time to go to that some advanced topics, right? So you know this. So now what we want is we want to perform what CRUD operations, right? So for that, first we need, so we have a table that is being created, but we will have to make a connection with the table, right? So we are able to create a service and repositories for that. So let's go to the repository, and let me just make it as a interface, and interface is going to extend JPA repository, right? And it is going to take two arguments. One is our model. So our model here is a quote, and our ID is going to be a long, right? So long. So this is what uh, replace long with the Java long. Yeah. So yeah. So this is what we're going to do. So we're going to create a repository for that. So we're simply going to create an interface called as code repository, which is going to extend JPS repository, and we pass quote and long in that. So long is saying that okay, the IDs are going to use are longs, and quote is our model, right? So now we have this, and now it's that time where we create our services. So quote service is where we try and this interface, we define all the services that we want to provide, like we want to create a quote, right? So let's say it's going to return me a quote, and I'm going to say create quote, right? And it is going to take a quote and quote, right? So when a user makes a request in the request body, he sends a quote. So we're going to create a quote for that, and we are going to create a quote, and we're also going to find a retrieve quote, right? So quote, I'm going to say retrieve all quotes, right? So in that case, I don't think we need any arguments for that. So we're going to return all the codes, and we can also return a code by ID, right? So particular ID. So retrieve quote by ID. So here in this case, we're going to take long and ID. So we're going to take an ID here. So let's take this Java long. Okay. So, and we can simply delete a quote, void delete a quote, and again we can simply pass long and ID, and create, retrieve, delete, and update. So we can also do that. So quote update a quote, right? So not to update a quote, we need actual quote, right? So quote, and so when somebody sends a put request with a code in their body, so we're going to update that. No, we don't need that. I think this is enough for us. So these are we are performing all the operations, right? CRUD operations. So I think that's it, and I think we also need ID for that. So long ID, because we are not aware of the ID, right? So going to take an ID and do the quote, right? So these are the services that we are going to provide to the user. So now let's try and do the implementation for that. Before that, I think I made some mistake here. So retrieve all codes will return us multiple codes, right? So this is good practice to keep it as a list of multiple codes, list of code, right? So this is how we're going to do. So now we'll go into our service implementation. So here we're going to implement our code service, and let's also override the functions, implement methods. Yep, so these are the methods that we're going to implement here, and let's call it as a service. So yeah, now this will become a service here, and this is service annotation will say that will say no Spring Boot that it is a service, and we're also going to take it as a transactional because it's responsible for the transactions, right? So it is going to be a transaction, right? So now we have our code service, and here we are going to implement our method. So we are going to create a code, right? So for creating code, we need access to a database, and we perform that, right? So for that, we are going to take the private the repository of our code. So code repository, let's call it as code repository, and it is going to be auto-wired by right. So it's going to be auto-wired by the Spring, and let's do that. So in order to create a code, so we are given our code body, so we can simply say code repository dot save and pass code, right? So this is how simple it is, right? So we have a code repository, and the code repository will provides us with the multiple uh, default functions for that. So this is why we extended code repository with JPA repository, right? And retrieve all codes. So we are going to retrieve list of codes, right? So for that, I'm going to say code repository dot find all, and simply say that's it, right? So it's going to return everything, but yeah, that's it. So it is going to return us all, and these are going to be a list of them, right? So let's again confirm what is the return type of find all. Find all, yeah, it is going to be a list of codes. Yep, thanks. So this is how everything works out, and we have to retrieve code by ID. So for in that case, I'm going to say code repository dot find all by ID, right? And we're going to pass our ID here. So ID. That's how simple it is. And okay. Okay, let's I think there's something wrong here. Let's do this. Codes repository dot find. Let's see. Okay, find by ID, long ID. It is going to be create an optional. Optional is nothing but, so in Java, optional is nothing but, so let's say when you're trying to find something, then it is not present, right? So if you're using optional as a type, right, if it is found it, then it's going to return quote. If it is not found, it is going to return me null. So this is what the best thing that I can use. I can say ID, and I think I have to modify this as well. So okay, I think I have to modify this to optional. Yeah. So this is going to be modified optional, and even in the service as well, it is going to be modified as optional, right? So it can either return null when the particular quote is not present in the repository, or if it is present, then it is going to return me that. Okay, and let's also try and delete this tweet. Okay, okay, how can we do that? Okay, let's say return. Okay, http dot okay. Yeah, http status dot okay. So we are going to return status as okay. Okay, it's going to return http status. So that is if it is deleted, it is going to return okay. If not, it is not going to do anything because we haven't found the tweet, right? So we're going to find it, right? So let's say flag quote flag, and let's say is equal to sorry is equal to quote repository dot find by id, and we're going to pass id, right? So this is going to ask me to modify this to optional. I will do that, and now I'm going to see if flag is present. So if it is present, then we know that there is a tweet that is present in that. So in that case, we're going to delete it from the repository. Okay, quote repository dot delete delete by id, and our id is id. True. So else we're not going to delete it. So the best thing to do is create a custom exceptions for each of these things, but we're not going to cover that in this video. That will be a thoda over the head for that. So public quote update quote. So this is one thing that we have to take care of. So how we're going to update a quote? So we're going to be given id and a quote. Again, we have to do the same thing. So we have to check whether the quote is found or not. So yeah, we found the quote. So once we found the quote, what are we going to do? So we're going to create a new quote. That is a new flag, and this is going to be of type quote, and quote new flag is equal to flag dot get, right? So we're getting it from this, and once we got that, so we are going to assign everything to our new flag. So new flag dot set id. Okay, dot set id. Let me just simply duplicate this. Okay, we're going to set ids, and what are the other things? So set author and set quote, and I don't think we can set time, right? So time will be automatically set. Set id is going to be what our present quote dot id. So present quote is nothing but which is being sent by our user, right? Quote quote get id. So again, the same thing, quote dot get author. Okay, quote dot get quote, right? So this is going to be a new flag, and we're going to set this new flag into our this thing. So since the id is already present, so this will be like updating. So now quote repository dot save, and we're going to save what new flag, and while we are there, simply return this so that the user will know what is the what is the change that him has made. Sorry, quote repository. Yeah. Yep. So this is going to be update, and delete, optional of retrieve. Okay, so implementation is practically done. I'm not sure if we are going to get errors or not, but let's try and do this. So let's try and map this. So let me just copy this a bunch of times. Hmm. Okay, so what is the first thing that we need? So API slash quotes. I'm saying S because it will return everything. So when somebody goes to this thing, we're going to return a list of quotes. So yeah, list of quote, and let me call it as get all quotes. So whenever somebody goes to slash quotes mapping, we're going to say get all quotes, and we're going to return list of. I don't think we need a list of, so because we have previously made it as a list, right? So if I go back to our service implementation, and what is that? Retrieve all codes. So we are simply returning find all. So what would be the return type of this? Okay, it is returning in the form of a list, right? So we don't need to convert them. So yeah, let's go back to our controller, and here we need to get a reference of our service, right? So let's say private code service implementation. I'm going to call this code service implementation, and again this is going to be auto wide, right? So now we can use this to perform all the jobs, right? So code implementation dot get, so retrieve all codes. That's it. That's as simple as that. So this is where I love Spring Boot, right? So our repository, our service, our business code, everything is so structured that this is just a matter of time, right? So we are simply getting that code implementation which is being auto-wired. So this is what a dependency injection is, right? So and again, so one is codes, and what if a person wants to a particular code? So this is going to be a get mapping. This is also going to be a get mapping, and code, and he wants a particular ID, right? So he sends a particular ID, and he wants I want quote slash 8. So he wants a quote with ID 8. Right? In that case, we are not going to return a list, or we are we. I think we can do that. So we can say list of quote. Okay. And we're going to say list of let's call it, let's say get quote by ID. Let quote ID. Doesn't matter, right? So let quote ID, let's call it as by ID. So when we are trying to get by ID, so let's see the what is the method that we have sent. So code service implementation dot, what is that? Okay, retrieve code by ID and send in the ID, and so at para. So how can we get this parameter? Let me just check with my notes here. Okay, so for getting the path variables, right? So for getting path variable, there is something called as at path variable, right? And if I say at path variable long and ID, so ID is going to be passed into this. So once we have ID here, so we can simply say ID, right? So what is that error? Provided put a list, cast to list. Okay, list of codes in convertible types cannot cast. Okay, let it be. So I'm going to simply pass code and remove all this, right? So What's again problem with this? Optional. Should I make it as optional? Optional. Okay. Why is that? Why is it optional? Because let's go to the implementation and okay. Okay, we are trying to find it by ID, but we haven't checked whether it is present or not, right? So if it is not present, then it is going to return as null. Okay, no problem. That will work for us. So we have taken care of code, all the codes. We've taken codes with an ID, and all we need is let's go back to implementation. Retrieve all codes. Okay, we need to know create for creating. So for creating, we are going to say uh, post mapping, right? So user will make a post request to the service to our API. So he's going to send a JSON object as a in the post request. So let's say uh, let's keep it as code itself. So when we have a code and we are getting this, so we're going to return what? What are we going to return? We are going to simply return code itself. Public code, so that he will see what request that he sent. Is it assigned a new ID or not? Right. So I'm going to call it as create code. And so for that we need to check for request body. So request body, and in the request body we're going to see code and code. Right. So we're going to get code in the request body, and we're going to return what? Uh, code service implementation dot create code, and we're going to pass code in that, and we're going to return this, right? So I think this is done. We have did the uh, this thing, and I think we did it everything. Yeah, I think we have to also do the put mapping. Put is for updating, right? So put mapping, take this mapping and code slash also has to pass the ID. So which code that he wants to modify, right? So let's simply call it as update code. And what is going to be the return type? Return type is going to be code itself, right? So once he updated the code, we're going to show him that okay, this is the updated code for you, right? And we're going to need two parameters. One is it request parameter, that is going to be path variable. Path variable is going to be long id, and at request body, the request body has to pass a code and code, right? So once we have the code, so we have to assign id for that. So code dot set id of, so what is the id that he is sent through the pathway, right? And once I set that, I can simply say code service implementation dot, what is that, update code, right? So pass id and pass code, right? So I think we have done everything, and yeah, I think we have to do delete as well. So at delete mapping, so this is where we expect a user to delete a code from our database, right? So this is ideally not the case, not everyone will have the access, but for the demo purpose, let's do that. So what is the path that we're returning? So slash uh, code, right? And he has to pass id, so id of which thing that he wants to delete. So once we have that, so we're going to create a method for that. So public, so should we return what? So I think we can return simply a http response, http http dot OK. Let's see. Return. What should be written when we're trying to delete a tweet? Status. Status. HTTP status. Yep. Return HTTP status. And let's say delete quote, and let's take it path variable, and it's going to be long id. So once we have the id, we can simply say, let's look at the implementation that we did for deleting. What did we do? Okay, we returned HTTP status, so delete quote. So we are passing an id and it will return us HTTP status no matter what. Return quote service implementation dot. So what is that? Delete quote and id. Yep. So this is going to return us HTTP status, and that is going to be taken here. And I think we are kind of done. Let's see. So let's see the. So one thing, we have created a quote. This is going to be entity. This is going to be a table, right? And we have created a repository that is going to extend the JP repository. And using that, we have created a service. So this is a service that we are providing, and its implementation. We are taking that implementation into our REST controller, right? And for each mapping, we are going to use these methods for that. Let's try and run this, and we'll see each and whether it is working properly or not. And let's debug that. I am, to be honest, I am a newbie to the Spring Boot. No, it's been like couple months since, couple of weeks only since I started learning this. But trust me, this is the most interesting thing that I have seen in the recent times. Okay, so we haven't got any error, luckily. So let's go back to our, let's try and to send hello. So it is not going to return hello because we have removed hello, right? So, but what can we ask? API slash quotes. You can say API slash quotes send. So when I'm trying to perform get request, it is giving me null because right at this moment there are nothing in our database, right? So let's try and put something. So put, in a sense, try add quotes to the database. So we are going to perform a post request, right? So in the body, we're going to say raw, and let's pass a JSON here, right? So ID is going to be autofilled, date is also going to be autofilled. The only things that we have to return, send in the body is one quote. So let's call it as quote, and let's call it as this is my most inspirational quote of all time. Okay, let's ignore the typos, and author is going to be, see, have you observed that the words that I am using are the names that I give to the columns, right? So that is where this name columns are used. So author is going to be myself, so I'm going to say Sai Prakash. Okay, REDD. So yeah, so this is going to be my request, and fingers crossed, let's send that request. And it is saying that it is not allowed API slash quotes post request. Why is that? So I've set quote here, and here I'm using quotes like an idiot. So if I send it as a quote, yeah, now you can see that it has sent that. So oops, I think we made a mistake in our this thing. So we sent two times IDs. Let's go back to our quote ID. Okay, ID generated value. ID. Okay, no worries. So we have an ID here. So let's send couple of codes here. So this is my most representative code of all time. Okay, I'm sending it again. So now this is given ID as 2, and again the timestamp is the published is changed. So let's send a couple of them. Let's also try and change this. Right. So we have sent 6 requests, and 6 requests has been successfully taken. Now let's perform a get request on quotes. So I'm asking quotes because it will return me all the quotes, right? So yeah, there's something wrong. Go to our quote and get mapping. Get mapping slash quotes. Get all quotes. Okay, let's try and say quote slash 2. Something is not. Is the delete working? Okay, I'm thinking for a moment. Okay, quotes is working. Let's let's try one of at a time. So we have quotes, right? So get mapping. So I've set quotes, and I did a get mapping, and when I did the get request, it's returning me empty list because there are no tweets at quotes at this time, right? So and the same thing happens if I try with slash 1 or 2. The quote slash 1. If I try this, it's going to return me null because there is no tweet at no quote at 1, right? So if I try and do the post at what is that post at q, is it u, okay, qut at qut, and let's say this is my thing, and let's send the post request, and it is giving me id of 1, and it has taken my tweet, and it is updated the author and the quote. Now if I come back and make a get request on quote slash 1, Yeah, it is giving me the tweet, right? So I can again go back and do quotes. It is going to retrieve me all the quotes, so list of all the quotes. So let's go back to post request, and let's add some tweets. This is my dopest quote, right? And let's change the author to, let's say, Snoop Dogg. Okay, so if I send this, then it is saying that method is not allowed because it is post slash quote. Yep. So when I say post a quote, so it has taken the quote and it has given me a response that the quote has been updated. So now if I go back to get and say quotes, here we go. So we are getting all the quotes here. So currently in our database we have two quotes. So one is from me and one is from Snoop Dogg. And if I want to retrieve a particular quote, I can say two, quote slash two. Here we go. So we are getting a quote with the ID 2. Right now, let's again test the remaining things. So quotes is working, quote ID is working, and post of quote is working. So we need to test put and delete. So put is where we try and modify a particular quote, right? So let's do that. So um, let's modify the second one. So let's say put, and we'll send this. This is my dope. So yeah, so you can see that when I set the put request has taken a quote, and it has updated the quote. So previously it was my dopest, and now it is my dope, right? So now again, if I perform the get, so you can see that in here, right? So it is updated in the database as well, right? And the final thing that we have to test is the delete, right? And delete, so would be slash quote on one, right? I think this is what we have designed. Yeah, so we can delete a particular quote at a particular ID, and it is going to return us HTTP status. That's it. And fingers crossed. Yes, so the HTTP request is 200, so it is returning me okay. So it has been deleted successfully. So this is how you can build a production level, production grade API. So I have shown a very basic example here, but trust me, when you're working for an organization, which deals with a multi-billion-dollar projects, right? This gets quite populated and quite big, and very quickly. But at the same time, it is very easy to manage once you follow this entire structure, right? So you can see this is why I like Spring Boot, where we are separating our logic into different layers, like repository layer, or this business layer, or service layer. This is like that. So this is why I like Spring Boot, and I'm planning to make like more tutorials on Spring Boot. And if you want, please comment in the comment box. I'll try and learn and bring some more dope tutorials on Spring Boot. I think this video was pretty helpful. If you're starting to learn Spring Boot, I will upload this to my GitHub, and will put a link in the description. And please, if you found anything useful here, please subscribe to the channel. Right, you will get to see my videos in the feed. And if you are not interested, please don't watch. Right, so I insist in people not watching a video if that is not helpful for them, right? So I try and make a videos which are helpful and which I would watch, right? Hence I wanted to keep this video slow, right? So you can, if you want a quicker explanation, you can go for 2x times explanation, so that you can cover multiple knowledge. It's at a smaller time. So this is up for this video. So we're able to create a full-fledged REST API which can perform all the CRUD operations, right? And we are using in-memory database, and we are using Spring Boot to be able to do that. So, and I hope this video was helpful, and thanks for watching. We'll see you in my next videos with many tutorials like this, and please leave a like if you like this video.